My name is Katrina Medoff.
I'm Tracy Sayer, and we are the founders of Women's Weekend Film Challenge. Felicia Pride is a writer and award-winning filmmaker. She wrote on 2 seasons of Ava DuVernay's Queen Sugar and currently writes on Grey's Anatomy. Prior, she developed a drama pilot, a book adaptation, with NBCUniversal and recently sold a pilot to 20th Century Fox. She sold the erotic romance Deeper to Universal Pictures and is the co-writer and executive producer of the film Really Love, produced by Macro, which won a special jury prize at South by Southwest. She recently made her directorial debut with Tender, a short film she also wrote, which won a Lionsgate STARZ award at BlackStar Film Festival and is currently airing on STARZ. Felicia was a film independent Screenwriting Lab Fellow and a graduate of NBC's Writers on the Verge program as a comedy writer. Previously, she worked as a film distribution executive and an impact producer, and is the author of 6 books, including The Message, 100 Life Lessons from Hip Hop's Greatest Songs. Felicia holds an MA in writing from Emerson College and runs the Create Daily, a resource for underrepresented storytellers that she founded in 2012. Please welcome Felicia.
I love that. Thank you so much.
We're so glad you could join us. Thank you so much for being here today with our filmmaking community.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before we jump in, I should mention that if you have questions for Felicia, we are going to get to audience questions at the end. So you can place all of those in the Q&A box. Please don't place them in the chat because they will just go right by and we will not see them. And you can also upvote questions that you want to hear the answer from the most. And just please remember that the chat is a kind space and keep it all supportive for everyone that is sharing their work today. So yeah, let's just jump right in. So Felicia, how did you make the transition from writing books to screenwriting?
So I actually made the transition by making what I consider a fatal mistake was I stopped writing. So there came a point where books became difficult for me, both in terms of like just ideating around what I wanted to write and also finishing books. And I realize now that it was because it wasn't my form, essentially. But then also it became hard to like sell books and make money. And so I stopped writing for about 7 years. And that's when I was running my consultancy. And I was essentially what we call now an impact producer, helping social justice media find their audiences. But then I came to a point where I enjoyed being of service to other creators. But I got that itch again to want to create. And that time around, I was like, you know what? I was kind of like self-teaching myself, starting to self-teach screenwriting to myself. So I said, I want to, try my hand at film and TV. And I had a mentor at the time who also went to Emerson and encouraged me to move to LA. I was 35. And in that moment, like I had thought about it before, but it always seemed too far. It seemed too overwhelming. But in that moment, I was like, I'm going to try it. Because she said, what's the worst that can happen? You come back. And I said, okay. And so that was 5 years ago.
That was really inspiring. Awesome. So you were selected out of a pool of 2,600 applicants for the NBC Writers on the Verge program. I have a 3-part question for this. 1, what do you think helped you stand apart from the other 2,600 applicants? You can answer that part first.
Yeah. So when I first moved to LA, I applied to the fellowships. First of all, I didn't know the fellowships, which if you're unfamiliar, the fellowships out here is a big deal. They have fellowship season, and basically the fellowships are programs by the major networks. NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox used to have them, still has one, I don't know, HBO. And they are essentially pipelines to get into television writing. But they're super, super competitive. So the first year I applied when I first moved to LA, but I had no idea like the competitiveness. I had no idea even how to do that. So I skipped a year and then I applied again. And this time around, I really kind of like delved into what the fellowships were and tried to find as much information as I could about how to be a successful applicant. One of the things that I did was I took the fellowship bio class through Script Anatomy, which is where I took a lot of my television writing classes. I always recommend Script Anatomy, but that really taught me the importance of the bio and the essay and sort of the framing of who you are, and also to have essentially a narrative through line of your whole application package. So I'll kind of talk about that, but I also made a big swing with my spec script, the spec script being a script that you write that's of an existing show. I wrote a spec script on Atlanta. So before I even wrote it, I went to the WJ library and read all the scripts that were available for I think it was only one season that had been out, just to get the voice down. And then I took a big swing, like my spec takes place in Purgatory, Tupac's in it, Whitney Houston's in it. I wanted to stand out in that way. But the core of that story is about father-son relationship. And so my essays and my bios were about a father-daughter relationship. And then my original pilot was about a father-daughter relationship. So that through line, I think, also helped to create a cohesive package and also show the type of writer that I was. So I think those are the things that helped me stand out.
Great. Part two, what was the most beneficial part of this program for you?
I think it's twofold. One, sort of the quote unquote validation for TV, because prior to that, I came out here with a feature, and I was really thinking in the feature space until I learned two things. One is that features are a director's medium. And then two, that feature money takes a long time for writers. So if you're looking to kind of consistently write, TV currently is a place to do that. So I was like, okay, let me look at TV. And so getting into Writers on the Verge was kind of a validation of that, which helped me personally to be like, okay, I'm on the right track. But then also, I think just the sort of network of my peers, I'm like, we still get together to this day, my cohort, but then also the network of the wonderful people who ran the program. It was run by Karen Horn. She has been an advocate for me, making calls on my behalf, et cetera. So I think those things really, really help tremendously.
Awesome. And the third and last part, you already mentioned having a strong bio and a strong theme running throughout your application. Do you have any other advice for our audience members who are looking into similar writers programs for applying?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are probably really important, is to have a really tight package across the board. So a really well-written script and spec or whatever they're asking for, but then also pour in the same sort of energy into the bio and the essay questions that they ask, because they're equally as important. And then I would say, especially for us writers, there's usually some sort of interview component if you move forward. And a lot of us still, our social skills just aren't there. We don't know how to present ourselves. So I think the more that we can be comfortable with what essentially general meetings, right? Essentially being able to build rapport very quickly, essentially being able to present ourselves and who we are very fast, getting comfortable with those things and being comfortable about talking about our work, I think goes a long way, because essentially that's what you'll be doing for the rest of your career.
Amazing. I feel like that was the most in-depth advice for really like, how do you approach these programs? Because it's so hard. You always hear people say like, apply to these, but how do you really succeed? So thank you for sharing all of that. Can you walk us through how you got your first job in the writer's room and what those first few episodes were like for you?
Yeah, so how I got my first job, let me back it up. So I sold my first feature, Really Love Without an Agent, which is apparently not that common to do. But that helped to get me some heat in order to like get an agent. And then I simultaneously was like in Writers on the Verge. So those two things helped me to get essentially hip pocketed by an agent, which means that they are working with you in order to see, before they actually officially sign you, to see if you are going to produce. And when I say produce, make money. So I was being hip pocketed, but, and so then I sold a pilot. So once I sold my pilot, that solidified my relationship with my agent. And so I was able to get repped. And through that, it was just a more traditional process. It was my reps sending my material to the showrunner of Queen Sugar, who is Anthony Sparks. And Anthony responded to my material. I got a meeting. I prepped for that meeting in terms of, making sure I watched all the seasons or rewatched any seasons that I hadn't seen in a while. Thinking of sample pitches in my head, thinking of my connections to the characters and my connections to the story and how I could be of use in the room. And then went on the meeting and set an intention. I love to set intentions before meetings or pitches. And this one was just to have a genuine connection. And it worked. And so Anthony moved me up the line. I had a quick interview with Ava, and then I got the job. So it was in a very traditional way that I got staff. But I will say one thing out of NBC Writers on the Verge, so I was NBC Writers on the Verge for comedy. And one thing that Karen Horn suggested to me, she said, you should write an hour long. There were just more drama jobs. That's just the math of it. And I said, okay. And it was that hour long I wrote that she recommended me to do that got me on Queen Sugar.
So I want to just ask a follow-up on something you mentioned, which was that when you were preparing to go into that meeting for Queen Sugar, that you had pitches ready. Does that mean that you already had ideas for what could happen in the next season of the show? And is that something that people need to have ready when they go into a meeting to potentially get staffed on a show?
Absolutely. Chances are you won't be asked that, but you might, so I definitely recommend preparing pitches. And I recommend preparing character pitches, preparing thematic pitches, and preparing like overall story pitches, so that you kind of have a mix of them, just in case. You never know.
So helpful. So you have so many projects in the work. I don't understand how you balance all of that with the overwhelming schedule of working for network television, for working with Queen Sugar and Grey's Anatomy. How are you balancing your own projects with that?
I think it's a couple of things. One, I stopped writing for 7 years. I know what that feeling is like, and I don't want to ever go back there. So I have a different relationship with work and with writing, that now I see the privilege in it. I see the luxury in it, but I also see the purpose in it. I feel like I have a bigger purpose that's bigger than this business to tell these stories that are burning inside and that tend to center Black women. So that purpose is what creates an urgency and a mission and a drive for me. And then it's discipline, finding a way to have a schedule. One of the things that I learned from one of my teachers in script anatomy, he shared his sort of how he moves projects forward. And I use that to this day. He always has one project he's actively developing, one project he's actively writing, one project he's actively rewriting, and one project he's actively polishing or pitching. And that's exactly how I go about. And sometimes I may have multiple projects, and then that's how I plan my day. In the mornings before work, I write because that's when I have more capacity. And then in the evenings is when I'm thinking about like developing or rewriting or things like that.
So I just wanted to just pop back really quickly to the pitching process when you're in that meeting. What do you mean by a character pitch? Is that how a character can develop next?
Yeah, just character specific pitches. Things that they can be doing next season, an arc for them next season, a plot point for them next season, but just character specific.
Awesome. So you were talking about your general, like you write in the morning, and do you have any other specific practices that help you in your writing practice?
Yeah, I mean, I take a bunch of classes. Like I am a class freak. Like I love classes. I'm in 2 classes right now. I'm taking a class next weekend. So what that helps is that helps to keep me in craft. And it helps to keep me surrounded by like my peers in this sort of with the intent of being growing our craft. And then also sometimes there's an accountability piece with some of the classes where you're turning something in or whatever the case is. But classes are really big. Writers groups, I'm in 2 writers groups. And I always encourage people to have a writers group or be in a writers group because it's so many benefits, but one of the other benefits that I don't know if we talk about a lot is just to be able to continue to strengthen your ability to identify story problems and solutions. Because that is essentially what your job is in a writer's room, but also for your own work. And the more that you can sharpen that through a writer's group is so key. So those things help me with my practice. Like I look at my craft as a practice that I'm continuously growing and enriching, but also, dedicated to.
So speaking of growing your craft, you recently had your directorial debut with the short film Tender. Can you talk about what you learned about writing from directing your own work, and also what skills a writer can bring to the role of a director?
That's a great question. So I just finished a scene study class last night that's for directors. And what I love about that class is like we analyzed scenes and we looked at a scene from Rachel getting married yesterday. And the writing is so great in that because it's really having the actor, it gives the actors a lot of material to not get what they want out of the scene. And so when I'm thinking now in my writing, I'm really being intentional and looking at, making sure that I'm giving actors a very tangible want on the scene level, and working hard to make sure those wants are oppositional, to create tension. So that's something that the directing has helped with that as you're doing your directorial homework and practice and thinking about and analyzing scenes. I've been able to bring that into my writing. And then in writing to directing, just the sense of story. I think that it helps when you're directing and knowing what you don't need and what you do need. It helps in the editing process when you have to reshape a story. But that sense of story is huge. It's huge.
Moving away from writing and directing yourself, can you talk about the collaboration with the director on the film that you wrote, Really Love, and how you got that project from page to screen?
Oh, that was a lot. It took about 10 years to sell that film. So when I came out here, I had part of my intent in moving to LA was to get the film made. And it would actually happen to be, it's just so funny how networks happen, or like who But anyway, I was at a cookout and Angel was there and we started talking, and she's from Baltimore and I'm from Baltimore, and she said she wanted to direct. And I said, oh, what kind of things? And she said, or that she was a director. And I was like, what kind of things? She's like, I really want to direct a romantic drama. And I was like, well, I have one. And that's kind of how we just started collaborating. And then we went in together to Macro, I want to say twice, and sold it. And yeah. But it took a long time. And so now when I'm thinking about projects, and that's also why I bucket projects, because you never know what's going to stall, you never know what's going to move forward. But also that's not sexy to me. 10 years, like I'm not interested in that anymore. I'm really trying to see, and that's why I'm always trying to understand the business and think creatively about how to get things made. Part of my mission isn't just like creating these stories, but it also is getting them made, or making them, and then getting them to the people who they were intended for.
And you really have that experience. I mean, you worked in distribution and you also really I heard very, very specifically went after, macro because you're like, oh, okay, this really, my project could really fit there. Can you talk about really identifying what the right places for your project might be?
Yeah. So one thing that I do is I read the trades every day. So like before this call, I was like, while we had a little break, I was like, okay, let me check. So I have like a Feedly and I read the trades and just trying to understand what's happening, who's buying what, who's into what. And I keep a spreadsheet of production companies that I've met with, production companies that I'm interested in, projects that I like, in order to identify what they're looking for. And if they would be a good partner / collaborator for specific projects. So it's really like thinking about your project, thinking about what they do. Is there some sort of middle ground? And then trying to find a way to connect with them.
Speaking of buying and selling, you recently sold your erotic romance film Deeper to Universal Pictures. Can you walk us through how you made that deal happen?
Oh, yes. I'm really excited about that film. That project came out of a general meeting that I had at Will Packer Productions. And I want to say months later, I got a call to come in and pitch on a project. It was me developing a pitch and also sort of going down a rabbit hole of what that space looked like and seeing that there also was an opportunity to tell a different type of story in that space. So then I put a pitch together and I took a pitch class through Script Anatomy, which really helped me understand the elements of a pitch, but also the elements of pitching. Like, developing a pitch is one thing, but also like becoming good at pitching is another thing. Like I really look at it as performance. For me, other people pitch differently, but for me, it is performance. And so really understanding that and getting good at that. So I went in and pitched the entire team actually the first time around. So Will Packer was there and James Lopez and Heather Washington pitched them. And I remember afterwards, Will was like, now that's a effing movie. And because I had no idea. I felt like, I was like, I don't know. I didn't go in very sure with that pitch. But then gave me notes. I incorporated notes, and then we went into Universal on a Wednesday and sold it on a Friday.
And you're also sharing a lot. You created the Create Daily newsletter. Can you talk about what that is and why you started it?
Yeah, I started the Create Daily in 2012, and it was a way to just like be of service to my fellow creators, especially those of us who are underrepresented. And it started out, I wanted to do all these things. I had all these things I wanted to do, but then I was like, well, what's the fastest and easiest way to get started? And that was through a daily email. So I would send one email a day to just had one opportunity, whether it was a program, it was a grant, it was a fellowship, whatever the case is. And then that has morphed into a weekly email that I send with a bunch of opportunities in it. And it's a free service. But it's like my, part of my community service and part of my purpose, I think.
I love that. So what advice do you have for a writer who keeps getting false leads, but nothing really seems to pan out?
Try to do something that will empower you, whether that is making something, or I always find that we put too much of our everything in this business, our self-worth, our financial stability, our ideas, all of that. And I think there's something to be said about having a purpose that's like, no matter what, I'm going to make this happen. And then finding creative ways to do that, even if it's outside the business, is one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is having a healthy relationship with your craft and with your work. And because that's the one thing that no one can take from you is the work. They can take the credit, They can take the money, but they can't take the work and the process of the work, which is where the joy springs from. So having a healthy relationship with that, and then continuing to get better, especially when, there's the false leads, there's the overlooking, just get better. Just keep getting better to the point where the false leads become real leads. The overlooking become people who can't afford you. So yeah.
Wonderful. All right, we are going to move on to audience submissions right now. We're going to have a lot of audience members submitted scripts. We chose 3 of them to share, and Felicia's going to give some feedback to them. And the writer will read it out loud to us as well. Before we get into that though, just a reminder, make sure to leave your questions in the Q&A tab. I'm sure everyone has a ton of questions. Leave them in the Q&A tab, not in the chat, or else we won't be able to see them. All right, I'm going to, do I need to make, can you share on your screen, Katrina? Okay, cool. So I'm going to read the summary of Angela Perkins' submission. This excerpt is the first 3 pages of the pilot. It includes the teaser, flashback scene, then goes right into present day, where our story will start in the series with Ruth. Logline: a hot-headed teenager comes of age in the spotlight as a star athlete while struggling to keep her superhero skin condition a secret. It's Luke Cage meets Euphoria in this 1-hour dark sci-fi drama. Ruth read. Angela, you can begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Interior house, bathroom night. A cracked, meek voice croons a lullaby in a foreign language. Tiny black hands grip tightly onto a handwritten letter. The letter reads, "My little Ruth, I'm sorry I had to leave you." A tear hits the letter, joining a rivulet down the note. A quiet sob interrupts the lilt. Small 9-year-old young Ruth sits against the wall across from the bathroom, head buried in knees. A red, seemingly hand-woven cloth hugs loosely around her little body like a makeshift superhero cape. Her hollow voice grows with a bit more volume, making it easier to make out the language, Zulu. Young Ruth peeks through the small opening in the fold of her arms. She gazes ahead at a pair of pale, stiff feet that are hovering a few inches off the floor. Exterior, ghetto alley at night. A woman screams, pleading for her life as she is being dragged by a hooded man. "Mommy!" Little Ruth runs over to the man, hitting him with all her tiny might. Stop it, leave her alone." In flashback, back at the Robinson house. Her eyes remain hidden behind her arms, peeping at the dead, dangling feet. Exterior high school day. Baseline High, home of the Grey Wolves. By the looks of it, it can easily get confused with a prison. Overcrowded classrooms, decked out security guards, racial riots, walkouts, the usual penitentiary delights. Inside the car, a catchy R&B song rumbles through the car speakers while a slim, fit, long braided hair 16-year-old Ruth sits in passenger seat, head turned to window, concentrating. Vibrant Bougetto, a mix of bougie and ghetto, Tiana, dances in driver's seat, animated as ever, even while sporting a bruised eye. She takes her hype into an obnoxious crescendo. Oh, and by the way, Ruth has red eyes, natural red eyes. I'm bossy, hey, yeah, a boss bitch, I'm a boss bitch. Tiana, will you shut the fuck up? Damn, you act like I'm the one who touched your butt. Tiana turns the volume down. Ruth's phone buzzes with a reminder alert. It reads, "Class at 5:30 p.m. tonight. Don't fuck up your chance again, Ruth." She surveys the radio clock. It reads 4:29. She grows anxious. "I don't even think Reggie get out the same time we do anyway. You know that nigga always stay in detention." "Nah, he gets out this time." "Okay, girl, if that's what you say." Tiana checks her face in the rearview mirror. She throws a quick glance over at Ruth, who is still busy looking outside. She digs into her purse to grab purple eyeshadow. She applies it to the eyelid of her bruised eye. "So what you gonna do when you see him? You gonna beat the shit out of him like you did them other boys?" When are these niggas gonna learn that there are consequences for their actions? We need to start holding them all accountable. Ruth looks at her as if she just preached a mighty good word. Only a limited number of niggas can touch this though. Chris Brown, Da Baby, Lil Baby, and Obama. Ruth turns with a frown. What? Don't look at me like that. Obama is fine, girl. Ruth dismisses her by turning back to the window. He's like a tall glass of cappuccino, and I love me some cappuccino. I mean, I know Michelle is probably kissing on him every night and caressing those soft curls. There he is. Ruth spots Reggie, a medium height, skinny, lanky black boy. He walks with his group of friends as if he's the king shit. Ruth, wearing some type of thermal protection gear, gets out of the car and storms after Reggie. It's on. Caught off guard, Tiana hurries out of the car to catch up. Group of friends start play fighting. Man, nigga, catch my fake. Reggie throws up his dukes. Nah, catch my fake, bitch. Bam. Ruth punches his face with her elbow. He falls.
Thank you so much, Angela.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What are your thoughts?
Hey, Angela, I would love to see you.
Hey. I wish I could turn on my video, but I don't have access to it.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your work. I know that that is not easy to do.
I was so nervous.
What an excellent read of your work too. It's what a treat to have the voice, hear the voices that are in the writer's head. This is really challenging though for me to give feedback on just the 3 pages. So I'll try my best, but I want to first ask if you have any questions before I kind of give any initial thoughts.
Actually, I do not have any questions. Excuse me, sorry.
Okay, well, I was definitely really intrigued by these 3 pages. I think you did a really great job of setting up a sense of suspense of, you know, what happened to Ruth, what happened to her mother. I think you did a great job with that. So kudos on that. I think some of the things that I was thinking about and that you may want to think about is one thing that I would really love to see is an idea of place. And I don't know if that impacts the rest of your pilot. So again, some of the things I'm saying literally might just be for these 3 pages, but you know, you open where she's speaking Zulu, but I don't have a sense of setting. I don't have a sense of time. I don't have a sense of place. And I think that might help to ground the reader in where they are and orient them, especially between young Ruth and present day Ruth. So that's something you might want to think about. And if that makes sense, could place be another character? So this place that young Ruth is that a character? And the place that she's in now, could that be a character? Is it Philly? Is it London? Is it, I just wanted to feel a little bit of grounding there. The other thing that I was wondering is, you know, and the thing that I think we can all think about for our pilots is thinking about the how, the when, and the why we're meeting our main characters. So you open with a young Ruth, which I think is really powerful. But then when we get to present day Ruth, I think one of the things I was wondering is like, why this moment? And because I don't know what happens afterwards with her and Reggie, that might be, you know, something very, very significant. But I was wondering, like, is this the most dynamic moment to meet Ruth in this present day? And especially when it's up against her friend Tiana, who has most of the scene. Is this the most dynamic way to? And it might be, but I don't know. So that's something to think about. And even in that scene with Tiana, which is really great, I agree with someone said it was great dialogue. I also wanted to get to what was going to happen faster. So you may want to consider the real estate with that scene, given that it is, you know, I think sometimes, and it's sad, but a lot of times people only read the first 10 pages. So if you think about the first 10 pages as being the prime real estate, and half a page almost 2 pages is her and Tiana. And we're not actually learning much about their dynamic. We're learning about Tiana as a character through how she talks, but we're not learning much about their dynamic. Is that the best use of space for those 2 pages? And then I just had, I did wonder if we wanted to get a glimpse into young Ruth's powers, or if that was too early in the first scene or in the second scene. Again, I don't know, but that was something I was thinking about. Like, do we want to get a glimpse of that? Even if it doesn't completely give everything away, is there a glimpse? I mean, you have the person that's essentially, I guess, levitating or hovering. It says hovering, but is there something that we could get a glimpse of for young Ruth? And then there was just some like formatting things I noticed. For instance, in the action lines under exterior high school, where you say, by the looks of it, it can easily get confused with a prison, overcrowded classrooms, decked out security guards, racial riots. Are we saying we're going to see those riots? Because it almost felt like if that's the case, maybe this should be a montage. It should be broken out as a montage versus action line. So you just want to look at some of your formatting and how you're writing some of the things. But I thought it was engaging, great dialogue, definitely have a voice. And I'm really intrigued to know what's next.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your feedback, and I'm going to apply it tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Get on it. I love that. It takes me, usually I'd be like, I need a day to sit with it. But that's awesome. Thank you. And keep going. I love it. I love it.
I think that's really helpful advice for everyone to think about, like, when do we introduce our characters in their life? Why are you starting the story now and at this specific point in their life? Do you have any additional advice on how to manage flashbacks at the very beginning when you're giving a short submission and you need to tell so much in such a short time? Is there should you try to avoid flashbacks, or is that a helpful tool in a short submission, in an excerpt?
I think it just matters on the piece, and what the flashback is giving. I think it's really managing what the flashback is giving us is probably the biggest thing. Is it, what are we getting from the flashback, and how is it ultimately going to hook the reader, push this story forward, show us something that we need, that's important for us to know about the character. But I think it just depends on the piece.
I also love that advice about this first 10 pages being the absolute most important real estate. So helpful. Anyone can look at their first 10 pages and look at it through that lens of, what if someone stopped right here? What would they think? So I love that advice.
Runners say that's what they give reads. I mean, if you think you have if they, as a showrunner, has a stack of 70 scripts, they're giving, the first 10 pages.
Yeah. All right, we are going to move on to the next submission, and oops, I need to close out of this. This is by Alexandra Buckaloo. Harold is a shy comic book artist who isn't living up to his own potential working as a pleb for the MTA. That is until a friend secretly publishes his Western comics about cowboy Buckaloo Riley, who falls in love with Harold's real-life crush. This particular scene is taken from the very beginning. The only thing that happens before this is we see Buckaloo Riley playing a game of cards when another cowboy runs into the saloon to tell him that Wild Bill has kidnapped Lucille. Alexandra, please start whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Exterior, Wild West, continuous. Buck rides up to find the beautiful damsel, Lucille Wood. She's strapped uncomfortably to the train tracks. Buck dismounts his horse and runs towards her. I wouldn't do that if I were you. 2 gun barrels point towards Buck's head. Wild Bill, in all black from his hat to his spurs, smiles deceivingly at Buck. A cigarette dangles from his lips. What are you doing back here, Wild Bill? I thought I already ran you out of town. Was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop in for a whiskey and a fine woman. Wild Bill flicks his still lit cigarette at Lucille. You know you're not welcome in these parts. Then y'all need to rid of that sign that says everyone's welcome in Dodge. Let Lucille go. You think it's that easy, do you? Worth a try. Buck tickles the guns that rest on his hips. Lucille squirms and yells through her mouth gag, getting tired of their foreplay. We both know how this is going to end. A train whistle pierces the air. Lucille wiggles and screams through her gag. Shame to see this one go. She sure made this crap town a little prettier. Buck pulls his guns on Wild Bill. Wild Bill aims his guns once more at Buck. You think you can outshoot me? I can outshoot anyone in the West. You'd have to learn how to aim first. Lucille rolls her eyes. What do you want for her? What everyone wants. Money. Of course, you'd steal the nickels from a blind man's eyes. He wouldn't need them. Shoot him already. So what are you going to do, Buck? Close on. Buck smiles confidently and pulls back the hammer on his pistols. A man in Nike basketball shorts on his cell phone bumps into Buck. Excuse me, man. The man keeps walking. Buck, Wild Bill, and Lucille exchange confused looks. Another train whistle blows. It's seconds away from Lucille. Buck! Wild Bill and Buck aim their pistols at one another. Interior, subway station warning, continuous. The express subway train whistle blows as it comes to a stop in front of Harold Rogers. Harold is a modern, less rugged version of Buckley Riley in his khakis and button-up shirt. He piles onto the train along with the rest of New York. Interior, office lobby, continuous. Harold follows the herd through the government-issued turnstiles. Interior office, elevator, continuous. Harold gets shoved to the back of the elevator. Hey girl, how was your weekend? Not long enough. Where are you going on vacation again? Harold's point of view. The women wear Western dresses and wave fans. The rest of the elevator, still in their modern day attire, don't notice the women's transformation. Tex is taking me to Cripple Creek. He's got kin there we can stay with. Harold smiles and laughs to himself. The man next to him takes as much of a step away from Harold as the elevator will allow.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Hey, Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Same here. Do you have any questions before I start?
I mean, I do. I have a ton of questions, but I'll limit it to just one. I write a lot of stories about male characters. I write a lot of stories that include a lot of diversity in my main characters, but I'm a white woman, so I get met with, why are you telling this story, when I try to pitch it to certain people. So I just wondered if you had any advice or direction of, obviously I want to tell stories and get people in the room that can tell other character stories, but just your opinion on creating stories outside of your immediate purview.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big question, because, a lot of it has to do with equity, right? One of the challenges is like, who gets to tell the story is one of the challenges, right? It's not that people who are not like the characters they are writing is the necessarily the issue. It's more of a systemic thing of who's deciding who gets to tell what stories and who is prioritized in telling those stories, right? I think that the question of why you're writing this could be a valid one in that you are making the connection to these characters, and what is it about these characters that you feel are pertinent to the story you're trying to tell, and also why you want to illuminate those journeys, and actually being very clear about that. I think that could probably help as part of the conversations for you to have a very specific answer to that, that is rooted in passion and clarity and confidence. But then also being clear about the fact that you'd want collaborators, if this project were to go, who reflected these characters, and that you have done your due diligence in terms of understanding what understanding what you're doing and doing your due diligence and, you know, having sensitivity reads, whatever the case is, but you've done your due diligence as a creator to this step, and that if it were to go forward, you'd want to make sure that you'd have collaborators that represented these characters. That's all I can say. I don't know, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was super helpful.
But I thought this was a really, really interesting, innovative, high concept, ambitious idea. And I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more about the premise as we kind of talk more about it.
Yeah, right now. It's basically about, it's between these two male characters, best friends, one Harold and his friend Nick. It's basically a story about control. Harold wants to have control over his life, and giving into his passions, his dreams, his talents would give him a sense of lack of control. You know, once you start relying on other people, putting yourself out there, you know, you lose that sense of control, which of course is an insecurity, it's fear, it's all these kind of things. And then Nick is the complete opposite. So he kind of seeks out adventure, lack of control, putting himself out there, and they kind of balance each other out and push each other in different ways. So it's about Nick kind of going behind his back to publish these comics, and Harold having to deal with the consequences of that, but also kind of finding the thrill in losing control over your day-to-day life, basically.
Okay, that's great. So can you explain the premise as it relates to the comics in these pages? I guess my question is, and this might be explained like, you know, in the first couple of pages, I know this isn't the start of the pilot, but is this supposed to, do these look like comics? I'm trying to wrap my head around how the Wild West looks.
In my head, they're not comics. I have him, it's kind of like most storytellers are, you kind of have these scenarios in your head, these stories in your head, and you can see them vibrantly, and his talent is drawing. So he draws out the same way we would write. So he sits and he draws out these kind of elaborate storylines. So in an essence, they're comics in the fact that you can publish them and do something with them that's tangible. But when we see him imagining things, it's kind of his way of escaping his day to day. And it's kind of how he builds stories. So we see kind of the world that he draws living around him.
Gotcha. I would just, and you may have done this in the beginning of it, but I would just kind of give the reader an understanding of what these look like. Because when I hear the word comics and then I see what is like an imagining on the page, I was just confused. So because it's so high concept and so clever, you just want to make sure that that's clear. You know what I mean? That like we are essentially in Harold's head, and that these actually will look like a Western, right? Is that because it's not going to be animated?
No, I don't. In my head, it's not animated. Someone wants to pay me otherwise, that's fine.
Yeah,
but
so just probably take it a couple sentences if you haven't already at the beginning of the pilot, just to explain what this looks like, so that the reader is like fully like, oh, okay, I understand, because I was just thrown off by the comic. So it's essentially establishing the rules of the pilot on the page, right? And also kind of the world, but establishing the rules so that the reader understands what they're reading. And then I think probably the other biggest note that I had is twofold. Is one, I wonder one thing that I was wanting is for the Wild West to be kind of trippy or subversive or just different. It felt very like a traditional storyline. And I was like, oh, this seems like such a great opportunity to have the stories in his head. You know, the world is the Wild West, which we're familiar with, but the actual like storyline of Wild Bill and Riley are like crazy. Or like I was like wanting more than a traditional Wild West storyline, if that makes sense. Is there a twist? And also what ultimately makes them popular? Because right now it feels very straightforward Wild Wild West. So I was wondering if there's just something subversive that Harold thinks in his head, or that Harold's creations are, so that when I'm on this page, and this is what, the second or third page of the pilot, I'm like, holy shit, like this Wild West world is crazy. You know what I mean? So that was something that I thought about. And then also thinking again about I love the fact though that you have the man in the basketball shorts walking through. Like I was like, okay, this is very, very cool. So like, how can you pump up that like going between two worlds, or just trippiness of Wild Wild West, so that we also know that's a little off, you know what I mean? Even more so than the basketball player. And then I think the other thing I was just thinking about was just the introduction of Harold. Is there a way that this introduction of Harold can be interesting or tell us something about his character, of his, you know, in-world character? We know that he clearly has a lot going on in his head, but is this introduction of him the most interesting way when we meet him on the subway station to meet Harold? Is there something that can be added to this introduction to give us insight into his character? So that's something that I was thinking about as well. But I think it's really like a incredible concept, really, really creative. So yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing. Yeah, it seems like what I'm taking away from this is that there really can't be any room for ambiguity in a screenplay, that like, if this is how you see it, you have to spell that out for the reader.
I think there can be, it just, you know, again, because I'm only reading 3 pages, but I wouldn't go beyond 10 pages with ambiguity. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, and we just have to balance our cleverness, right? Like I have like, this is clever, but also I want to make sure that my reader, so I found, like, for instance, when I was talking about my Atlanta pilot that takes place in Purgatory, so I had, it's grounded, but then I also had to introduce elements of like people flying and like stuff like that. But I had to kind of establish the world of the rules of the world quickly, so that the reader was with me. That makes sense. Definitely. But that's the reason why a lot of us, like, this is a big risk that Alex is taking in the pilot, and some of us don't do that for that reason. Like, if it doesn't work out, it could be a big. I remember the program coordinator of NBC Writers on Verge was like, it could have gone disastrous for you when we take big swings. So, but it also can go really, really well.
Yeah, awesome. All right, our last one is by Rachel McLeod. The summary is: No Man's Land is a dramatic TV pilot with a former train robber who escapes from prison, makes her way to Texas, and opens up a home for wayward women. This is the opening 3 pages of the pilot. Rachel, take it away when you're ready. I didn't allow, there. Can you unmute yourself, Rachel?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, perfect, yes.
Okay, that was a scary moment. Okay. No Man's Land. Exterior, San Quentin Penitentiary, daybreak. 2 pelicans soar majestically across the San Francisco Bay, headed for shore. Turrets and guard stations visible through marine layers. Super, San Quentin Penitentiary, 1905. Crack, a gunshot. Feathers explode as one pelican falls from sky to sea. Squawk, the other bird dives away. Inside a guard tower. Guard with handlebar mustache, bowler hat, and double ammo sashes lowers a smoking rifle, smirks at the easy kill. Pre-lap, bells chime. Women's ward, day. Bell rings carry across a bleak courtyard. A women's ward sign above the doorway to a 2-story building. One red hibiscus bud pokes up through the dead plants. Women's ward, first floor cell. Through the iron bars, a perfect view of the flower. On a lumpy cot, Bertie Brandt, 25, draws the flower with a dull pencil. Her long blonde hair matted, she wears a thin smock with number 142455 stitched across the front. Cries, yells, and clanks, a constant background affliction. Bertie holds up the sketch and smiles, a mouthful of yellowed, unbrushed teeth. She sets the artwork on a stack of flower drawings and picks up a wood tobacco pipe. The cell door clangs open. A stocky guard, holstered gun and pork pie hat, snatches Bertie. She's kicking and fighting. You son of a bitch, no! He cuffs and drags her from the cell. Matron's quarters, day. Musty, weathered furniture in a room with barbed wire covering the window that looks seaside. Matron Fuller, early 60s, rolls a cigarette at a desk. She's a beady-eyed, wrinkled raisin face with high-collar dress. A knock on the door. Enter. The guard pulls a fighting to break free Bertie by a chain. Come on, girl. Bertie spits at him. Matron Fuller grabs a baton with a blade at the end and slams it onto the desk. Bertie, settle yourself at once. Bertie's eyes flash with anger as she's led to a chair. The guard connects the loose end of the chain to a metal hook in the floor and leaves. Have you any kinfolk on the outside? You got my baby. Where's she at? Your motherly rights were abdicated when you came here. She needs her mama. Reconcile this in your heart. You are not a mother. Your belly may have carried one when you arrived, but the child is a ward of the state. Been nearly 2 years now. Bertie lunges forward, but the chain holds her back. Why you brung me here? Matron Fuller strikes a match and lights her rolled cigarette. Your petition for early release was denied. Crestfallen, Bertie stares the matron down. Train robber, thief, a woman like you has no remorse for her actions. The judge saw through your pleas. I may rot in here and you may think you're gonna break me, but at least I don't look like a damn old billy goat. Matron Fuller points the knife end of the baton at Bertie. Watch your tongue if you ever want to walk out with it. Bertie reluctantly quiets. That's better. Now you'll be moving to a room on the second floor this evening. Why? I can't. Warden's orders. Bertie thinks. Shit. Come on, May. You gotta help. Mess hall. Porridge plops onto a canteen plate. Bertie and May, early 30s, rough and tumble woman in a line with other female prisoners. Reckon I can't change your mind? They're moving me.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
You're still muted. Oh.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
I don't think so. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Great. Well, I thought it was great. I thought you had really great world building, and really kind of grounded us where we were. I thought that you got us very quickly understanding what Bertie wants and what she's up against. So honestly, my feedback was more like just curiosity about where the pilot goes and what you see as the series, and sort of the engine of what takes us from week to week. But yeah, I thought that it was great.
Thank you.
So in terms of like the rest of the pilot, like how far does the pilot go? She breaks out in this.
So she does break out actually at the end of Act 1. She is on a train to Texas. She's escaped prison. She's actually found some money that she and her husband robbed from a train. She steals it all. She decides to leave and basically change her name and never look back. She has help writing a letter to her husband that's in a prison as well, at Folsom State Prison. And she's basically like, fuck you, I'm never coming back. You were always terrible to me. And she finds out that her daughter is dead, and she's gonna turn her life around and try to move on. And so the beginning of Act 2 is her we do a time jump 25 years in the future to Prohibition. And she has opened a women's, a home for wayward girls. They also run a ranch, and they also are bootleggers, just trying to survive during the Depression and 1930s, a bunch of women that are kind of independent and going their own way. So
I think that's great. I think that was my question, like, how fast do we get to the like, how much time do we spend in the prison? But it sounds like your pacing is really, really great. Like, you're like, get out, time jump. And like, we don't even need to see her establish the house. Like, she's got the home. She's like, that's really, really strong, because it gets to like it sounds like what you really want to tell the story of this home. And like you said, these women who are bootleggers. And so I think that's great. That was my main thing, was curiosity about like just pacing and tone, and also what you were going for the show. Because I think the biggest challenge about a pilot is you have to establish so much and picking and choosing what parts of the story to tell. But it sounds like you're getting to the heart of the story you want to tell very quickly. So that's great. I really don't know what else to say. That sounds like,
Thank you.
But I thought the dialogue was great. I thought you established who Birdie was in a great way through dialogue. And, I thought it was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel, for sharing. Thank you to everyone who shared. That is not easy to do in front of 300 people. So kudos to all you writers out there. And thank you so much to the audience for being so supportive. Speaking of audience, we're going to move on to our audience Q&A portion now. So let's just jump right into that. Don Cole asks, have you been treated differently because you entered the industry later in life? Has it been helpful in any ways or harmful in any ways?
I chose to look at it as an asset, that I, number one, know how to deal with people and industries and systems. I had a lot of experience doing that. Also a lot of life experience to bring the writer's room. So I have stories to share and things to add. So I use that as an asset as well. And also how I chose to move. Like, I personally knew I wasn't built to be an assistant at 35, based on what I had done previously. So I had to make specific decisions about my career. And so that was a sacrifice, in terms of like, okay, this is not a way into the business for me. So what are the other ways, and how can I try to get in another way? So it helped me to make very specific decisions about my career based on knowing myself, which I think helps as well. Just that sense of self. And so I've chosen to look at it as an asset, versus anything else.
Speaking of career journeys, Ryan Bess-Winnick asks, I'm on the fence about whether or not to get my MFA in TV/screenwriting. Do you think this is a necessary step?
I think that's a personal decision. And I think it's a decision that's based on, is it going to be free? Or do you have money to pay that, because for me, I think grad school is often an opportunity to pay for the space and time to focus on craft. And that could be worthy, that could be worth the money. So I really think it's a personal decision, but I don't think anything is a requirement. Like that, I don't move in thinking that anything is a requirement. So.
Awesome. Teresa Rodriguez asks, what does a workday look like for you? What does a work week look like? And how does a year look?
Ooh, work day. Well, I, get up and I like to have like my yoga or workout and meditation time. And then I typically work from 8:30 to 10 on whatever I'm writing in the moment. And then I go to work in the Gray's room from 10 to 4. And then depending on if there's work from Gray's, I do that after work, or then I usually do like if I don't have a class, I usually do like a 5:30 to 8 or 6 to 8 shift, doing additional work. And then I like to like read or watch a movie or something like that at night. That's sort of like the normal. And then I also work on the weekends a lot, which I'm trying to be better at. But that's more normal, but sometimes you might have to pull longer hours or whatever in order to make deadlines happen. But when I try to be disciplined and do deep work and be smart about how I'm touching projects, I'm able to get a lot done during those times.
One thing that sounds challenging to me is I imagine that you have work that's really deadline driven with Grays often that you have to do outside of the writer's room hours. So it sounds like you have to be really disciplined to say like from 8:30 to 10 or whatever it was in the morning, like these are hours for your other projects, right?
Yeah, but also for me, it just helps to establish the priorities for my career for me. When I start out my day by working on my own projects, that tells me something about what the priorities are, before I'm able to like go into work or give of myself to, my job. I've gotten my projects out of the way. So it's really just important for me because it helps with that momentum and keep things going. So, but yeah, there's certain times where you have to, like, if you're on set or whatever the case is, you have to make it work.
Nice.
That's such good advice. I was like, that like really hit me there because as someone who like juggles a lot of different things, I'm like, wow, yeah. Like prioritizing like what you want to really be like working on in life. I love that.
And I like that you prioritize exercise and meditation at the beginning of the day as well, because I think so many writers, we get so stuck in our heads and we think that that's the most important part, but our heads are part of our body and we need to take care of that as well.
It's true. And I have seen the connection between my growth in craft with my growth in my self-work. So the more that I know myself, the more work that I put into myself, the better my craft has become, because I'm more connected to what we call, like in the some of the training that I do, the inner life. The more that I'm connected to that, the more the self-work that I do. So like I can track my trajectory in terms of like success is very much based on the amount of self-work that I've done.
Awesome. And then the second part of the question was how a week is like and how a year is like. Can you talk about the structure of the longer term projects?
A year. Oof. A year. What does a year look like? A year looks like a lot of those types of days. I like to plan in quarters. So I like to think in chunks of 3 months. But I also do planning before the year to know what I want to achieve that year and kind of stay focused on that. But yeah, it's a hard question for me to answer because, yeah. Especially after last year, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, we all had probably an idea of like what would our year look like, say in 2020. None of us were right about that. So Lauren Washington asks, can you talk more about how you develop character pitches, story pitches, and overall thematic ones?
In terms of when I would go into a showrunner meeting. Yeah. So, it's really about brainstorming ideas on what could be interesting for a character to do, or how a character could change, or how a character could surprise us. So that's a lot of sort of the ways that I think about character theme is like, you know, what could this season or part of this season deal with that might be relevant to what's going on now, or might be relevant to the characters. And then overall story is like, is there that might be like overall plot points. Like, you know, I want this family to go through a loss because it'll bring them close together, or I want this. So those are the type of just overall, like those are more plot driven often. But the characters are more like arc driven and emotional driven, but they can be plot driven as well. And then thematic is definitely like more emotionally driven and thematically driven, of course.
Angelia Baxter asks, after selling your projects, what comes next? Where are you able to see them produced? Were you able to see them produced? Are they something you will revisit if they don't get produced?
Good question. So the first feature I sold was produced, and that's coming to a place for you to see it sooner than later. And then the first studio feature I sold to Universal is in development. So I sold the pitch, so I wrote the script. So the script is in development. The first pilot I sold did not go forward at the network. So actually I'm revisiting that and turning it into a feature pitch. But I am very invested in getting projects produced. So when I think about the producers that I want to work with, I also look at their track record. What is their track record of getting things made and produced, particularly in the feature space? What are their connections? What value can they bring to help me get this produced? Because I'm definitely not that interested in writing stuff that's never made. Or I'm thinking about how can I make it? How can I, through my production company, which I'm trying to build, find financing and make it.
So you've mentioned the importance of the writers groups that you're in. We have a two-part question. Fatima asks, how do you identify a really good writers group? And Deshelle Taylor asks, what are the key components for an effective writers group?
Yeah, I think a great writers group meets regularly, has members who are all serious in terms of their craft and showing up. And then I think it's also great when you have a mix of viewpoints when providing notes. So you have a range of perspectives that helps. So I think those are the things that make it helpful. And then what was the second part of the question?
The second part of the questions are what makes a writers group effective.
Oh, a writers group effective. That your work gets better, I think, is one, definitely a sign that you're getting feedback that is helping your work to get better. That you are getting better at giving feedback and articulating feedback, and that you're getting better at identifying problems or challenges with stories and identifying solutions. I think those are really huge benefits coming out of writers groups.
Alexandra Engelson and Virginia Schneider both asked which writing courses you recommend.
Script Anatomy for TV. I know that they also started features. I've taken TV writing classes there. I've taken the fellowship and bio class there. I've taken a pitch class there. I always recommend Script Anatomy classes. For directing, I recommend Directing Actors with Adrian Wise, who's out of New York, but Brad Butler teaches it in LA. They have a bunch of different types of classes that I recommend.
We have a question here from Jenny who says, do you have any advice for folks who are pivoting into screenwriting from a different career? Do you need an agent? Should that be the singular focus? or focus on creating a calling card by producing a short or other proof of concept?
Well, if you're screenwriting, you want to have writing first and foremost. So you want to have a really strong portfolio. And when I say portfolio, just a collection of your samples. And I usually recommend, a portfolio to have 2 specs. So those are scripts of existing shows, and there's always debate on whether people should write specs, but regardless, they're still great activities, because essentially as a staff writer or writer on a show, you're writing specs. Your job is to write in the voice of the showrunner. So the more that you can practice that, the better. And then 2 original pilots in the length that you want to write in. And if you want to write in half hours and hour longs, then have samples in both of those, at least 2 original pilots. And then like a feature, if you want to write in feature space, and then a wild card, a short story, a play, whatever the case is. But you want to make sure that you have a portfolio that is tight, like those samples are tight and ready to go. They've been vetted by other people who are not your friends. And yeah, so I would start there before thinking about agent, before thinking about even making something. Because for screenwriting, we're talking about writing, and that's the measure of, effort and talent and all of that.
You're unmuted, Tracy.
There. Mashka Media asks, how do you and your agent set your floor for your fees per type of project so you don't sell your work short but stay competitive?
Can you repeat that? And is that from Tembisa? Hey girl, what is it?
Mashaka Media asks, how do you and your agent set your floor for your fees per type of project so you don't sell your work short but stay competitive?
So we don't necessarily set a floor. What happens is you get an offer in, and then you work with your agent and or your lawyer and or your manager to then make the counter. And so then that'll set your quote, right? Your existing quote. So you make a counter and you guys go back and forth. And once you negotiate the rate, that'll become your current quote for a pilot. The thing is now is that agents can't, or companies can't call and find out what your quote is necessarily, but it can still be used in the negotiation process. So that's kind of how it works. So, for instance, I just sold another project, and I told my team what money I wanted based on, I did this time. This is the money that I want because of my, proven track record in doing this, doing that. And this is what I want. And so they build a counter offer around what I asked for, what I'm asking for, essentially. And then we'll go back and forth and hopefully land close to what I want. That makes sense.
Oh, that's very helpful. So speaking of selling your work, Aria Robinson asks, how did you sell your pilot and what was the strategy for who you sent it to or how you sent it out?
I have not sold a written project except in the feature space. They've all been pitches. So we didn't send out the pitch. I don't send out pitch pages. That's something I do not do. I know that other writers do it. It's something the WJ does not recommend us doing. It's a practice I don't like for many reasons. So it's usually getting with my team, and when I have a pitch idea, and then deciding what producers might be good to try to set up pitches with. So that's how we do that. And that's based on, the type of work that they do, what they respond. And then my team will reach out to them. And then whoever responds and is interested in hearing the pitch, then we'll set up the pitch. So that's typically how that's done.
We hear this kind of question.
I want to say the reason why there are cases where you want to sell the script that you write on spec, in this meaning that you write without getting paid. So there are definitely going to be times when I do that. but I do try to get paid to write the script before, at least try to go the pitch route. If I can't sell the pitch, then I may think about writing the script on spec, but my goal is to get paid for the quote unquote least amount of work.
Yeah, nice. Rachel Berg asks, are you ever worried about your ideas getting stolen when you pitch it, or even talk about it in a class?
No. It's ideas are, it happens, right? Like we've seen people whose work has gotten stolen. But I don't know, I also partly kind of feel like, and also I guess maybe I don't do high concept ideas a lot either, that it's really like how I write it is going to be very different than how someone else would write it. And also an idea isn't much until it's executed. So that's why I always though encourage us to execute our ideas, because then we have more of a ground to stand on, just period. But yeah, it's just not a concern that is big enough for me to worry about.
Great. And we have a question from Teresa Rodriguez. What does it mean to bucket a project, and how do you now get projects sold faster?
When bucket, I just mean like having projects in different stages of development, essentially. So I'm always having a project that I'm actively developing, always having a project I'm actively writing, actively rewriting, actively pitching or polishing, just because I work from a slate. So I say like, these are my slate of projects that I'm working on. In order for me to get them out the door, the way that I work, I need to have them in different stages. And that's how I push them through the process. So like I pitched a project, what is today? I pitched a project Thursday. And so while I'm waiting to hear back, I move into developing a pitch for the next project while I'm actively working on the script of Tender the Feature. Like it's how I move things through the process. And then how do we get projects sold faster? I don't know. I mean, things take the time that they take. So I don't know how to answer that one.
We only have time for one more question. After Felicia answers this, we'll say goodbye to Felicia, but Katrina and I will stay on to answer any questions that you might have in the audience about the film challenge, about virtual, like requests for future workshops, anything. We'll stay on for a while, so don't leave after this final question.
And we will also be sharing the links to our next 2 workshops and our next virtual networking event. So stay on for those. We're excited to let you know who our next guests are.
Kat Roman asks, what is your greatest challenge as a creator?
Greatest challenge as a creator. Probably finding money to get projects made. I think that's like a universal struggle that we find is like, and I don't mean, so that's me thinking about in the independent space versus in the studio space. Yeah, I think probably that might be one of the biggest challenges that I have is finding the money for projects, but it's still not impossible.
You're muted, Tracy.
I said. Well, thank you so much. We just got, and someone mentioned in the chats that it's 3 a.m. where she's listening. So people wanted to stay up the entire night, and I'm sure people would stay up for hours more to listen to you. This was such a fun night, so helpful. Thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable and amazingly helpful with all of your feedback and wisdom. Thank you so much, Felicia.
Thank you for having me. And I'm just excited to see all of these creators working and to make stuff and writing and sharing their work, which is, a really huge important piece. So I just encourage everyone to just keep pushing.